Good afternoon, everybody. It is 5 p.m. and I am the chair of the Planning Commission, Greg Hooksma. I'm calling the meeting to order. First, we'll take attendance. Commissioner Soltis.
Here.
Commissioner Brown.
Here.
Commissioner Greina.
Here.
Commissioner Bennett.
Here.
And from the city, we have Carl DeSimas
Here.
and Michelle Thomas.
Here.
So first item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from our last meeting. I am willing to entertain a motion if there's no discussion or corrections.
I move we adopt the minutes.
I second.
Okay, any discussion? Hearing none, then all those in favor say aye.
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 Motion passes unanimously. Okay, second item on the agenda and the only item on of the main agenda is the urban growth area analysis. But before we get to that, I have an announcement to make. And that is that we should all congratulate Carl DeSimas, who is the City of Gig Harbor's new principal planner. And this is a significant step up and milestone in his continued development and career, and a very well-deserved and well-earned effective promotion. So congratulations, Carl.
Congratulations.
Here, here.
Congratulations.
Great, Carl.
Thank you guys very much. I appreciate that. Thank you, Chair. Very nice of you to say. And yeah, it is an honor, and I am humbled by it, and I definitely appreciate the opportunity for sure. So.
All right. Well, pressure's on right now. Let's see what you can do with the principal planner.
All right. Oh, thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, so this evening we are continuing our discussion on the urban growth area analysis that we started, I don't know, it was maybe a month and a half ago. We had a sort of an abbreviated discussion about this. And it was so abbreviated, I think, that I really didn't even mention it in the memo that I provided to you for this meeting. But we did talk a little bit about just kind of what was up and coming at that meeting, and the fact that the city has contracted with a consultant called Burke out of Seattle to help us with this urban growth area analysis. And I think I provided a few materials to you to give you some background on just kind of what annexation is in general. And I think that's kind of the point tonight, is to sort of continue that discussion, add a few more teeth to the discussion, and maybe start to glean, if we could, start to glean some thoughts from the Planning Commission to help guide the next steps, which are the sort of the meat of the will be the meat of the project in general. So I had hoped that Burke was actually joining us tonight, but it appears that they're maybe got hung up. I'm not sure. And so I'll follow up with them after the meeting and find out what happened. So anyway, we will carry on as it were. So in the memo tonight that was prepared for you, it has some bullet points in it that kind of talk about what it is we're trying to accomplish and what we're trying to achieve. And that is to develop this analysis of the urban growth area. We're trying to identify within that urban growth area some, potential annexation areas. Are there areas within looking, when we pull that data from the urban growth area, are there areas within the urban growth area that could be considered potential annexation areas? In other words, breaking it down maybe a little bit smaller and saying, all right, well, if we were looking at annexing in the next 20 years for whatever the reason might be, is there a smaller area that makes sense for the city to target, and why? In order to do that, we need to focus really, a lot of what we're going to be focused on are, a fiscal model identifies the financial impacts of taking those areas in. So right now, the consultant is really busy at work crunching data, and the city has provided them just with a plethora of data that they're going through for all of the urban growth areas, and as well as areas that are sort of on the fringe within the city boundary that connect, as far as road connections, sewer, water, all of the utilities and things like that. So they're looking at population, of course, in those areas as well. But one of the major impacts of annexation is, well, how much does it cost? It always kind of comes down to who pays how much and for how long. That's what I learned in planning school. So that's kind of how annexation works in general. And so they're taking all of our data that we have. We've given them a huge data dump from our GIS information, and we've given them a huge data dump from our finance department as well. So all of the background information essentially that goes into the adopted budget for this past year, they have it at their disposal at this point, and they're looking into sort of trying to use that data to project what the city's cost might be in each of those areas were we to bring them in. As part of this work, we need to coordinate with you, the Planning Commission, to get some guidance on that assessment, and really looking at, what are the characteristics, what are things that we should be focusing on other than potentially fiscal data that could be used in our UGA analysis or in the report to come up with some criteria that could be used as policy by decision makers in the future for annexing potential areas or bringing potential annexation areas into the city. And that criteria, could also be considered and be useful for the Planning Commission, because a lot of this would come to the Planning Commission as well when we get to that point. Just recognizing that Commissioner Bradbury has joined us as well. Welcome, Commissioner Bradbury.
Thank you.
And then finally, there is part of this process. So it's a little bit different process because it's not a legislative process. There's really not a decision to be made here. We're not really adopting a comprehensive plan amendment in the end of this process. We're really adopting a report that would be used to inform potentially policy in the future. So it could inform amendments to the comp plan. It could inform text amendments to our zoning code, excuse me. Had my window open there. And it could be used to inform, we could use it to inform just a decision on an annexation if we were to receive a petition for annexation in one of these areas. So it's not the typical legislative process. So in that sense, we have, we're bringing this to Planning Commission to get some direction and guidance on really kind of focused on the decision-making criteria. And then the next steps are planned to be taking it to council for study sessions. And then ultimately, once we have a final version of this that's gone through Planning Commission and council and everybody is feeling comfortable with it, then that would sort of be the end of the process. Or I think it might be a little, I guess, lackluster, for lack of a better word, because there won't be necessarily a hearing. And so also in that sense, then there's not really a lot of public involvement necessarily in this process. And that is because what we're really doing is just pulling together a report. It's an analysis. It's not really a decision there's not really a decision to be had at this point. And we want to be careful to ensure that the Planning Commission understands, and council, when we get to that point, that we're not really trying to look at this as an analysis of an area to say, yes, we want to annex that area into the city. So, we're not trying to, that's not the point of, or the goal of the project. And so looking at the bullets here, I think I covered most everything as far as what the project entails. And then for tonight, we included a few documents for your review. The project charter, sort of major tasks, and that's kind of what we've contracted Bert to work on. We have a frequently asked questions about the annexation process that we would hopefully you've had a chance to take a look at and may have some questions about, or may have some ideas about how to make that better. Or maybe there's more questions that could be added, I think is really would be the goal, if possible, from Planning Commission. And then we have a sample petition. That's just kind of a general idea of how, and what we receive when an area wants to annex into the city. So that's kind of part of this too, is how does annexation work? And it's kind of a complicated process. It's not real straightforward. You probably noticed that if you were thumbing through that MRSC 2020 annexation document that I think I shared with you all. It's a little convoluted, and it always kind of takes twists and turns and goes different ways once it starts to happen. So, and then finally in the memo, we have a sort of our tentative schedule. I like to kind of try and keep you guys up to date on the direction we're moving in. This is an ambitious schedule in some ways, because here we are just kind of talking. We're still sort of, I think, just hammering the outer edges of this thing. And my hope is to get, we're going to have a lot more of the fiscal analysis done by the time we meet again and discuss this project. And so saying that we would only have the 2 PC or Planning Commission study sessions before we go to council workshop, that might be a little ambitious. That might slip a little bit, and I think it all kind of depends on your level of comfort after we get through a couple of these meetings. So that's what I would say about that. Okay, so I've got a PowerPoint I'm going to pull up here and walk through. It's a bit of a simple PowerPoint, but I think it helps the conversation.
Carl?
Yes, Chair.
Before you launch into that, that FAQ document was really helpful to me. And do you have any problem if that is shared publicly? And I just happened to, on Nextdoor, one of those social media platforms, there was a lot of discussion just in the past few days about urban growth, and so it started with people being spun up about what's going on at the corner of Hunt and 38th Street, and there's a lot of misconception about the fact that that's outside of the city of Gig Harbor, and what's the difference between the county and urban growth and all that. Point is, that document, if I were to post that on there and share that, would provide a great amount of information to straighten out a bunch of misconceptions. Do you have any problem with that?
So I think what I would say about that is right now on our website, we do have an FAQ that's related to annexation, and it does include some of the material, some of the questions and answers that are within that document that you're looking at. And I think if that's sort of the draft document at this point, I think after this discussion tonight, if the Planning Commission is comfortable with that document, we would likely post that to the webpage that is associated with this project, and thereby making it sort of presenting it as a public document. If that's okay, Chair, if that's a satisfactory answer. So at that point, then I think it would be something that we could share publicly for sure.
Sure. I mean, anything that since people are it's the top trending post on Nextdoor. I see Amanda smiling, so maybe she's seen it as well. And there's just a lot of misinformation, and it would be nice in the most timely fashion even if you could provide me a link that people wouldn't have to search the city's website to whatever's there already.
Okay.
And add that FAQ sheet because again, it was superb education for me.
Yeah, I can share the link that we have up right now. And then after this meeting in the coming days, we'll have this other information available as well. And so we can share that. Michelle, remind me, have we set up the website for this project yet? I feel like we have not gotten that up yet.
We have not gotten that up yet. I got the SMT up.
Right.
I can get that up tomorrow or start working on it, drafting it tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll have that. We will have a website up soon for the public to be able to sort of follow along in this process as well. We just haven't gotten to that point yet, but and your point is well taken. I know the project that you're talking about, there's a lot of buzz around the city about that one as well. So I know it looks bad in some ways, I guess, unfortunately. Oh, okay. I will share my screen here.
Yeah, and if everybody that's not muted can please mute their microphones in the meantime.
Webinar.
Okay, are you seeing that title page for the Gig Harbor Urban Growth Area Analysis?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so like I said, this is sort of, it's a simpler PowerPoint than I normally throw together, but I think it gets us talking about the project here. So let me, why is that not going? There we go. Okay. So again, this is kind of sort of regurgitated information here that I just sort of went over with the memo, but it gives a little more background, some idea about what urban growth areas are, you know, and the idea that when we're annexing, we are annexing our urban growth area, and we are really only allowed to do so. If it's not within our urban growth area, then we really can't bring it into the city as a code city. The evaluation is, like I said before, is really meant to provide some future guidance and will hopefully be the basis for some policy framework. And it will give us a really strong, good analysis, a good idea of what we have in each of those UGAs. That's really at the end of the day, what we're hoping to have is a really informative document, so that when and if an annexation is proposed, or if council wants to propose annexation in an area, we have a good idea of what's there. And then the next part of that is coming up with this criteria for considering potential and requested annexations in the future. So how does that, right now we don't have really a decision-making process. If somebody were to propose an annexation, we would be, you know, we don't really have that, we don't really have the data, and we don't necessarily have a solid criteria for decision-making. This is our current urban growth area that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And it's, each of the areas have been designated or given kind of a name. And a couple of these names are, I think Burke had come up with, and they broke it up just a little bit more. For instance, the area in the south, I don't believe we had a Madrona Links previously. But that's really what's there. There's a golf course, so that kind of makes sense, but it's kind of relative to Reed Road, but it is broken up and bifurcated by SR 16, so that does make sense. But this is generally our urban growth area as it sits currently. This map is depicting what the urban growth area looked like back in 2002. And I think it was Commissioner Bennett, if I'm not mistaken, who asked at the last meeting about, you know, how did these urban growth areas come about? When were they initially designated? And that I wanted to make sure and address that question. And it goes back to 1994 when we were first looking at comprehensive planning and growth management. And so this map represents kind of the initial UGAs for the city of Gig Harbor. And you'll note that it is quite a bit, not quite a bit, but a little bit different than what is there currently today. Let me see if this cursor thing, laser pointer, works. You'll note that this area in here is now within the city limits. That's been annexed in. We have some other areas actually down here that I just noticed when I was looking at these maps, preparing for this meeting, that we have some UGAs down here now that we didn't have at that point. So that's kind of interesting, and I don't know why that is. There is area here that is now, this is the women's prison here. This area has been annexed into the city, and a little bit of this, a part of this portion of this has been annexed into the city at some point. And really one of the big changes is that we reduced our UGA, which is very rare for a city to do, and when we got rid of this East Bay urban growth area. So this gets a little bit into the FAQ that was provided, and talking about why a city annexes or why it wants to annex, and some of the slides coming talk about advantages of annexing, and you know, a lot of it is really relative to the fiscal benefits, and that, you know, that a lot of it really does come down to that. And there's, you know, there are benefits and drawbacks. There's both advantages and disadvantages for cities to annex. And so it does become, in some ways, becomes a numbers game. Here's just a few of the advantages that were cited. You know, one of the big ones for those folks who are living in an urban growth area is that they're already sort of living close to the community, but they really don't have necessarily a say in the community. And they're working with a government that's sort of removed from them. But you know, one of those big advantages is that they do get the planning and management, and they get well, I guess this is from the city's perspective, is that the city gets to plan and manage those areas. And so this directly correlates to what we were just talking about with 38th Street and Hunt. That's a parcel that's in the urban growth area, but it's in the county. And so technically that's under county jurisdiction. Their regulations apply, even though they have some regulations that they've brought in that are relative to the city's regulations, but they're not exact. And you know, that's another good example of a site that's on the fringe of the city. It's taking access from city right-of-way, and so there's impacts to city right-of-way as a result of what's going on there too. So, you know, one of those big advantages for a city to annex urban growth areas is that we alleviate that stress, because the city now gets to govern under their adopted regulations for that site. When somebody wants to develop, the city gets the property sales tax revenues, bonding capacity can be increased, and it reduces our requirements to provide urban services like sewer or water, or, as I just said, right of way and access. Here are a few of the concerns from a city perspective, that, you know, we have to service and support that area after it's brought in, and that there are, you know, oftentimes there's site-specific challenges, and you know, we cited the Washington Correction Center for Women as one of those challenges, obviously, if we were to bring in that annexation area. Advantages from the residents' standpoint, they get representation in city government. Their taxes stay within their own community rather than going out to the larger county. They improved access to municipal services, road maintenance, policing, you know, the response times are faster for fire services, and well, not always, not here for fire services is going to remain the same, but for policing, it definitely would change. Potentially allows for additional site development and future planning, increased property values due to those higher levels of service. And we note that the schools were not really impacted. School district wouldn't really be affected. Some concerns from residents in the UGAs that their local taxes probably, you know, their property taxes probably increase, sales tax increases. There's changes in impact and development fees. Those probably increase when they come into the city. And, you know, changes in local ordinance. Generally speaking, a city's zoning code is a little bit more restrictive than a county. Generally speaking, it's typically a little looser in the county, even in the urban growth areas. So the annexation process, as I was saying before, is I saw some nodding of heads when I was sort of referring back to that annexation booklet, and that it's kind of confusing and it's a little bit convoluted in how annexations work, how they operate. And I'll be honest, I haven't myself personally gone through a lot of annexations, just a few very site-specific annexations in my career. So, and you know, they don't happen often, and especially large ones. It's pretty rare. There was a big one in Sammamish just after I left there, and it was a major annexation, and that was very rare for a city to do. But they were a new city, and so it made sense probably for them. This is this slide is sort of representing the most common practice for annexation, the most commonly used annexation process. That's usually, you know, and in this case, it's initiated by the folks living in the UGA. And, you know, to get started, they have to have more than 10% of the residents or owners representing more than 10% of the property value in order to make application. Once they've made that application, then council determines whether or not they want to accept the proposal and move forward with it. If they do, then the applicants have to go back to their area, back to their community, and get 60% of the assessed land value in the proposed area, the owners representing more than 60% of the assessed land value in that proposed area to sign on to the petition. If they can't get that, then it dies. It doesn't move forward. Once they have that, if they do get it, then they file that back with the city, and then it goes to hearing, and it carries on from there. It's the county boundary review board would review it and determine whether or not they would approve it. And if they approve it, then it comes back to the city, and the city council then passes their ordinance. And then after that, then there's an enumeration process that the city has to go through in going out and basically doing a census of what is in the area as far as residents and homes. And then we provide that to the Office of Financial Management and Commerce. So as you noted when you were looking through that booklet, that there are other methods that are utilized, and there are a myriad number of methods that can be utilized. As an example, and I should have provided this to you, but it really didn't make it through. But there was I'm going to go back up a slide here, or a couple of slides back to the map. The last time the city was serious about annexing areas, the council had passed a resolution to annex what we called the notches, which are this. Can everybody see that pointer? I think you should be able to. This area right here, this area over here, and this area right here. The city was looking to annex those 3 areas. Was it just those 3? Yes. And they were going to use the annexation area by an interlocal agreement. And in that process, the areas that are to be annexed must be surrounded on by the adjacent city by 60%. 60% of the boundary of the area must be adjacent, directly adjacent, or surrounded by the city. And so those areas met that criteria, and council was moving forward. Unfortunately, it didn't play out. The council determined that there was a change in administration, and there was a decision made to abandon the process, and so it was never fully carried through. But that was the last time that the city was interested in something along those lines, and so I just wanted to cite that as an example of another type of annexation process. Go back here. So back to the analysis at hand, and what the sort of intent of this is. And so the next few slides are kind of getting into what the study, and they're a little bit vague, but we're hoping, we're going to be honing in more on this. And I think that when we get the fiscal analysis, when we come back to you next time and we have more data to actually provide and discuss, some of this will be illuminated, I think, at that point, and I think we'll really get down to the nitty-gritty. But sort of generally, what we're hoping to do is figure out how the city should kind of prioritize annexation in some ways, and that would be, based on what those criteria are that, what we come up with. That's these factors that should be involved in the decision making. Examples: tax revenue, servicing costs, need for local representation, and then what are those other considerations that we need to be thinking about. The content of this study would be, as I said earlier, would be a full analysis of the UGA, population, development, land use, what's there currently. Projecting what could be there won't be a part of this study, because that's hard to do. We can't really look at projecting what kind of development would be there. We can look at what land use is there. We could look at what the city has in its comp plan in the UGAs for land use designations currently. And we could sort of say, okay, well, this area is going to be more commercial, this area is going to be more residential. But that's probably about as far as we can drill down on it. Future required investment and services. So if we were to annex an area, what is the cost to the city going to be relative to services and or roads? Do we have is there sewer in that area, or is it on septic currently? Those are questions that would be answered. Fiscal impacts of annexation. So how much does all of that cost to maintain? Are there areas that we know we would have to bring up to certain standards right away? Or if development were to occur, how much would it cost to, say, widen a road? Or would we have to bring water? Most of the time, if there's development, we're putting that on the developer to do anyway. But so a lot of what we'd be looking at is maintenance costs, really. Delineation of the potential annexation areas. So are there, like I was talking about at the beginning, are there sub areas within these UGAs that would make more sense to annex? And so, we could consider those potential annexation areas. Recommended priorities for annexation, and then any other considerations. Overall, annexation is really a part of the decision of local landowners, and we're really trying to provide some guidance here. So ultimately, we're trying to come up with some policy guidance for making decisions about those future petitions. And or, as I said before, if we wanted to say beef up our municipal code, Title 7 or Chapter 1788, where we talk about annexations, we would have maybe something within this document that we could use as support for making those changes. Same with a comp plan update that's upcoming. I think this will be a very useful tool when we get into updating our comp plan. So here are some questions to think about, and we may, we may or may not get to any of these answers this evening, and I think that's okay. But I think it's this is sort of a good starting place to get the discussion going. And if all we come away with this evening are is leaving with this question in our head, so that when we come back and look at the fiscal analysis, we're thinking about these possible factors that should be considered in evaluating UGAs for future annexation. I think that would be successful as well. The net fiscal impacts on the city are important, but we have to think about other questions, and that's kind of what I was saying, is that this fiscal analysis is going to happen. Burke has the data on that. Those are numbers. That's a number crunching exercise, and so they're going to come back with a set of numbers for each of those areas. But some of the other things that we can think about are requirements for future capital investment. Now, we do have some information, and we're working with the city engineer as well, is providing some input here. And so some of that could be answered in the report through analysis and recommendation from the engineering side. What are potentials for new commercial development? Like I was saying, we know what the land uses are currently, at least in the comp plan, for those UGA areas. And so we have residential areas and we have commercial areas. And then is there desire to include certain UGA residents within the local government? When we're annexing areas, you're also inviting more voters, right, into the process for bringing in new city council people and mayors. And so that creates maybe a level of competition between certain areas in the city. Need for consistent planning of urban land uses. And then, what are the other reasons? Do we want to have a municipal golf course or something along those lines? And just, throwing examples out there. So this slide represents kind of a future look at our next session with the Planning Commission. And as I was saying, so Burke is really crunching these numbers. They're going to come back with this description of the current conditions in the urban growth area, review of draft results from the fiscal impact model that they're putting together. So it's going to be hugely informative. So what are those impacts on the city's budget? And then a discussion about findings and what else should be considered when evaluating annexation. So that is those other considerations for annexation that we feel are important in the decision-making process. And then we threw in another project schedule, which is similar to what is in the memo. So with that, kind of at a discussion point here, Chair.
I have a question. Sorry, can you guys hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Okay, if I ask a question now.
Yes, of course.
Okay. So along with like the fiscal impacts and all that, I'm assuming that the demographics as far as, the age of residents and those type of things is included in the analysis.
I think that's a very good point, Commissioner. And I haven't had a chance yet to look, but I know that the census was just released within the last week. It finally came out. As you know, it was delayed. And so, yeah, I think that is going to be a huge piece. I have not had a chance to talk to Burke yet about that. We did talk about it early on when we were first talking about this project. But yeah, I believe that demographics will be part of this analysis as well. We also are waiting on the final buildable lands report from Pierce County to be completed. Staff has worked with Pierce County to get that finished up. We've reviewed the data and the assumptions that Pierce County planners have put into the buildable lands report, and we've made comments, but we haven't seen the changes yet. And that's supposed to be happening. Well, they've delayed it now, but it's supposed to be coming out next week or the week following. And that's going to really inform this discussion as well, I think.
Thanks.
I would offer a comment here. I can understand that an older population would bring certain additional requirements. However, we need to be very cautious about making decisions based on age or other similar criterias that could lead to complaints of discrimination.
I think that's a fantastic observation, Commissioner. Thank you for that.
Carl, I'm kind of interested in why the city needs this annexation study now. Can you give us some idea of how much annexation activity the city has had historically? And yeah, I guess that might be useful.
I think it's a good question, Commissioner Brown. I don't have at my fingertips that information. Since I have been at the city, there have been, I think, 2 very, very small site-specific annexations, and I believe that both of them were sort of emergency annexations, and in other words, they had failing septic systems, and so in order to hook them up to city sewer and not charge them through the teeth for the connection fees, they were annexed into the city, and because they were in the UGA, it was something that could easily be done. As far as major annexations and annexation activity, there has not been a lot. I know historically there have been some petitions that have come, and I haven't been a part of those, but there were some petitions that have come from Canterwood to get into the city, and they've not been met favorably by the councils at that time. But I think part of the reason for the timing of this analysis is that we're coming up into a comp plan periodic review cycle. And it kind of feels like the right time to find out what we have. It also, I think, was part of that discussion with the notches, this more recent attempt by council to bring in a few areas, to annex in a few areas. And I think, they kind of got to the point in asking some of those questions. Well, why are we bringing these areas in? What benefit how does it benefit the city? How does it benefit those residents? What's in those areas? I think a lot of these questions were starting to be asked, and so they didn't have a playbook really to go about it. And I think it made some council members nervous in some ways to just go about it that way. It felt loosey-goosey. And I think something like this will help give the decision makers more confidence in moving things like that forward. So that's the best answer I have at the moment, Commissioner Brown. Hopefully that helps.
That's helpful. Thank you.
I have a question about the petition idea, because you've talked about the petition where you can have a group of people get together and decide, that they want to petition for annexation. How does it work when it's the opposite? The city is going to decide that they want to annex an area. Does that petition then go out to the people within that area to see if they're interested in it? Or is there something that the city can say, we're going to do this regardless of your interest? Yeah,
so that's the, that interlocal method of annexation that the city engaged in previously with this 60% of the boundaries contiguous to a city. And the city has the ability to do that through resolution and an agreement with the county to bring those areas in if they meet that criteria. And so, you know, it's kind of these areas that have to be surrounded by a city. So it's just kind of a no-brainer that they come in, but there still has to be a hearing, and those folks still have to be engaged who live in those areas. And so they would have an opportunity to get into the public process. I've not been a part of one of those processes to know if there was, you know, I think if there was broad pushback from the area, it would make sense to me that the city would probably back off on it unless there was really some emergency need or some, you know, some real need to bring it in. So that there would be a public process that would be involved with it. But it does work a little bit differently, you know, in that sense.
That makes sense.
Carl, I have a couple questions. Will Burke identify current issues in areas, and I'm just thinking of the notches and how silly it seems, you know, that our police drive up and then they got to potentially turn left and then turn right and then right again to continue pursuing the criminal. I mean, I don't know if that's a real thing, but the point is, I can envision issues maybe not exactly analogous to that, but that are challenges for the city because of areas that are not annexed. And it would be helpful for me to have them identify those kinds of things, you know, for us to inform the council to say, hey, here's a current problem that should drive your desire to annex, you know, this particular area. Maybe those problems don't exist, and maybe I'm just making stuff up.
So you're kind of thinking about an example that you're using then is if we had an emergency on the other side of a urban growth area, you're in the city, but you can't go through this UGA area to get to the other side in order to provide those services. Yeah, I could see that. I think probably that doesn't exist or doesn't happen very often, I wouldn't think. I mean, usually the police, our police department and the sheriff's department out here work pretty closely with each other. And I think they even respond to things together oftentimes if there is something that is needing, more, needing help. I think that they have some agreement. I don't know that for sure, but I believe that that's true. But I think it's a good question. I'm thinking about when you bring that up, it brings to mind maybe a connectivity issue in that maybe there's not good road or good usable road through that urban growth area because the county never brought it up to speed, or there hasn't been any development there to make that happen. I think that is something that certainly could be a consideration in a decision-making process. I think I'm getting to your point in a roundabout way.
Have them look into that, that'd be great. And then my other question is, and it kind of harkens back to what Tom was asking, and that is much of what we do is driven by state mandates, at least, and sometimes trickles downhill even from federal mandates. And so is any of this being driven by state timelines, which then go to county timelines, which then go to mandating us to keep up to snuff with our fair share of urban growth?
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah. Well, that's kind of coming out of the buildable lands work that's being done right now in trying to determine, does the city have capacity within its city boundaries to absorb the potential or to absorb the mandated growth targets for population. I shouldn't say mandated because we are kind of choosing those growth targets, but we're a portion of the larger pie within Pierce County, and so we have to absorb a certain percentage with other cities and towns of our size. And so that that is why the buildable lands report and those growth targets, getting that finalized really helps, is really going to, I think, inform part of this process too. Because if we find that we don't have capacity, if we're saying we're going to grow by 3,500 people over the next 10 years, just throwing numbers out there, and we look at our buildable lands report and find that, well, we don't have land available for 3,500 people, that would mean, we would have to be doing, up zoning or more density. And that's not really how it's supposed to work, even though we are supposed to be providing more density within the city boundaries. But if that report were to show, yeah, we're probably going to have to bring in some more land, we're going to have to find some more developable land, and that has to be within our UGA, then that would be kind of a mandate, and that certainly would be a part of this analysis.
Okay, yeah, and I just took note of, I was reading some data today that, based on census data, I think Gig Harbor is one of the fastest growing cities in the state.
Yes.
We grew from 7,000 to 12,000 between 2010 and 2020. And, notwithstanding towns that, had 43 and went up to 83, Gig Harbor is kind of up there leading the pack, as it were. And again, if I'm recalling some numbers correctly from prior meetings, and talking about the our proportions of the urban growth, it seems I remember a number that our projected, I can't remember, it was 2030 or 2040, that we are already very rapidly approaching, or maybe even had achieved, the 2030 or 2040 target, that was a.
And that's correct, Chair. Yeah. So the last time we went through the target setting process was for a 2030 target, and that was, we were projected to reach 10,500 population. Now, going in the target setting process that we're going through right now, our baseline is 11,240. So yeah, we kind of blew it out of the water. Now, you don't get credit for blowing it out of the water, is the unfortunate thing. When this process, in the planning process under growth management, when we get to that point of looking at new targets and looking at buildable lands again, it sort of resets. You get kind of a new baseline, and then you get a new planning horizon. And so you're sort of planning out again another, this would be out to 2044 from, we're going to have our new comp plan periodic update in 2024. So we'd be looking out 20 years out to 2044. And so we'll have kind of a new set of numbers for our population targets, our housing targets, and our employment targets. And that's then what we're basing our capacity assumptions on at that point, and looking at our zoning and obviously our land use, and then our zoning when we're looking at the comp plan. So yeah, the city of Gig Harbor has been very successful. I suppose some people would look at it as success, and some people would look at it as a disaster, and so, it just kind of depends on where, what lens you look at that through. From a growth management perspective, we're doing well because we are growing within the city boundaries, and we're bringing people into those city boundaries. And in that sense, then we're eliminating, we're supposed to be eliminating folks from living out in the county or the non-urban areas. We're building more urban density within our boundaries and within our urban growth areas. You're muted, Commissioner Soltis. Commissioner, you are muted. Sorry.
That's what I get for trying to follow protocol. Carl, I was going to say that, the city's grown but so has the whole peninsula area, Gig
Yeah.
Harbor Peninsula. I mean, it's grown far beyond what it was expected to. So there's growth throughout the area. If I may kind of segue here a little bit, because my comments were more, Greg, along the I'm concerned if you just do a numbers game, Carl, like you talked about, that annexation will probably, in many cases, lose out if you just do a, by the dollar value, because there's always going to be a lot of liabilities out there.
Mhm.
And I think we have to be very careful to consider maybe the non-cost issues as carefully as the costs. There's probably a lot of positives for trying to capture the growth areas in the urban growth areas to control some of the growth that we're seeing and the development as it happens under perhaps less stringent plans and procedures. I think of some of these things that are just over the city borders that are, right now happening and we can't do anything about it. And all of a sudden the traffic on our roads is, is much affected because of the new development.
Mhm.
Those kinds of things to me seem like there needs to be a way of quantifying them, or at least adding them into the annexation equation. They don't maybe even have a dollar cost to them, but they certainly have a long-term impact on the city planning. I think we should try to figure that out. And I'm not sure I have any answers for that, but like the road projects that the Pierce County has in its budget to do around in the UGAs, are those projects going to become our liabilities? Or is there a fund transfer that we get the state money that was going to go to those? Probably not, right? But anyway, I'm saying, essentially saying, let's not necessarily make it all dollars and cents. I think we have to be very mindful of the other intangibles that will affect quality of life in the city and in this whole analysis. I'm going on mute.
And I think that's a really good point, Commissioner. And that's what I was trying to capture a little bit today as well. That we have this fiscal analysis that's going on, and that is a numbers game. It's data. It's kind of hard and fast, and we're going to get that information. And I think your point is well taken. That if we just look at those numbers and the costs to the city, maintenance costs alone, levels of service for police. Increasing staff potentially, so your staff costs go up. There's a lot of factors that probably lead to a loser. We're never going to annex anything then. But if you take it from another perspective, like you were bringing up, and I think development stresses on the city infrastructure, that's a biggie, and that's definitely one that has been discussed. I've heard the Public Works, they talk about it all the time. And in fact, this project over on Hunt and 38th is a great example, again, of one where, the city, we were able to, because it's in the UGA, the county then provides us with the application. We're on the notice list. And when we get those within our UGA, we actually create a permit number for reviewing them. So we just got a new one, I think, today. And so we review those, we provide comment, and on that one in particular, we actually even went to the hearing and provided testimony because we had some big concerns. Now, a lot of those concerns were listened to and they were incorporated into the final approved application, which is good, but we didn't get everything we wanted. And so, there were a few things in there that would have been done differently if it were in the city. But one of the things that came up was transportation and the effects on our roads as a result of that, of those homes going in, and the access points and the frontage improvements that they, our frontage improvement standards are a little different than Pierce County's. And so we said, well, no, it needs to look like this. It needs to be to this standard. This is our road. And so, we won on a few of those points. So I guess the point is that there are some there's already some of that process that works between the city and the county to make sure that these things are done correctly. But we don't have what's called an UGAMA currently with the county, which is an urban growth management agreement, urban growth area management agreement, UGAMA. Yeah. And that is something that Katrina has talked a lot about trying to get done since she's come into her position, to really get a solid agreement with the county to say, look, if you're developing on our boundaries and our borders, it needs to look like this, and that's it. You know, there's no, and unfortunately, we've never had that. And so the county is not really obligated to listen to us unless it's a SEPA matter, in which case then we can kind of turn the screws a little bit on SEPA, because we can go and get ecology support if we feel like something's not right, which we have done recently. And actually on that hunt in 38th Street, I think we did bring got ecology involved. But your point is really well taken. And I think that is exactly what we need to try and get to is, what are those other considerations? What are those things? Development stress, I think that's a big one. How do we quantify that exactly? What are those factors within that that we could point to and say, yeah, here, okay, so development stress, that's one criteria, and here's a bunch of sub points under that some things that can be measured. And Bert can definitely help us out with that, and borrow from examples from other cities that have done this kind of thing. So I've got that one written down here as something for Bert to do some research on.
Piggybacking on top of that, is there also something that they would look at annexation for open spaces or recreation spaces, parks, that sort of thing? Looking at what is currently on those properties and saying, hey, maybe this is something we could use for a future park space or a recreational area or something along that.
I think that that's a possibility. We have certain requirements for the amount of parks and open space that we need to maintain under growth management, based on population growth. And obviously, as the chair was saying earlier, our population growth has certainly gone up, and we will be looking at our parks and open space plan, parks, recreation, and open space plan is needing to be updated again in the not too distant future, certainly while we're doing our comp plan update. And so that will inform, what the needs are. And I think annexation is certainly that could certainly be a fine factor, I think, for looking at an area and why bring it in. Now, then you bring that back to the cost a little bit. And of course, that's all cost. That's like the city's not getting a whole bunch of benefit out of that, except that they're satisfying this requirement for parks and open space. So.
I have a question back to the project work plan summary that was in our packet list, looking at the tasks that Burke was doing. And task 2 for them, and maybe we've talked about this before and I missed it, but their task 2 was engagement program support, and that was talking about the public engagement efforts. Where does that fall into the timeline for all of this?
So there was, I think originally when we were looking at this project, it was a little bit misconstrued in what we were trying to achieve. And so we were kind of originally looking at going out to the UGAs and bringing and engaging them in seeing what they would want. But we've since realized that the direction that was taking was really more about trying to find areas to annex rather than just doing so it was more of an annexation analysis rather than a UGA analysis. And so we realized that we were maybe pointed in the wrong direction a little bit, because that would sort of start to lead to a kind of a decision-making process of saying, yeah, we're going to annex that area, we're not going to annex that area. And that's not really the point of this. The point is really to come up with a tool whereby the city can look at it and make an informed decision on whether or not to annex an area that's interested in being annexed, or a city or an area that the city has interest in annexing down the road. And so what we've decided is that the engagement piece of this is really going to be more of just informal information that will be put out on the website. So if there are public that want to get involved, they certainly could, they could reach out to us and say, hey, I see you're doing this UGA analysis and I've been following it on the website. They could come and listen to these meetings. Certainly they could listen to the council meetings. And I suppose they could have some input. I don't know, with what we're trying to do here, there doesn't seem to be as much room for public input, really.
That makes sense. That makes sense. It seems like it would be a future step after this document is prepared. And then when the council decides they want to do something, then you start going out to the public at that point.
Yeah, we have this tool, and we have this tool in our toolkit that we're using to make these decisions. But of course, whenever you're annexing an area, there's going to be public input coming into it, or whenever we're formulating new policy for a comp plan or for our or for the zoning code or something like that, we have a public process that's a part of that, and then the public could get involved. And and hopefully what we have is a document that is full of facts, more so facts than anything else. Now the criteria, I suppose that somebody could argue that that's a little bit subjective, but that criteria is going to be formulated by planning commissioners who are appointed by council members who are elected to represent. And so I think that is the purview of where you sit and where the council members sit, I think.
Carl, do those remarks that you just shared with us apply to the public participation plan, the new public participation plan, which was one of the tasks in the Burke statement of work?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Commissioner Brown. And so the public participation plan will really be this process, these meetings that we're having, the council work study sessions, and then possibly a council meeting. We haven't quite gotten that far as to what that's going to look like, because again, this is not a legislative action that we're taking here. But that's and then the website, of course, putting that out for people to know what's going on if they want to follow along.
While I've got my mic turned on here, I have heard it said, and I don't know whether this is whether there's any truth in this or not, but I've heard it said that annexations are always revenue negative for the city. And I know that there's a concern about that topic. Will Burke's financial analysis include some predictive information about what the cost to the city and the income to the city will look like over time?
Yes, that's definitely a part of their fiscal analysis and the fiscal model that they're creating. It's predictive in the sense of what the city does now within its city boundary and what that could look like in that UGA if it were to be annexed. And if you say over time, I guess, are you thinking that it should be some kind of an analysis that includes inflation or the cost of things 20 years from now versus today, that kind of thing, or just
I'm thinking
how much it's going to cost the city to have that area within the city boundary over a period of 5, 10, 20 years.
Yeah, I'm more concerned about what the cost will be like after any eventual build out, rather than inflation. I mean, different UGAs would have different amounts of future development, right?
Yeah, and so Burke, we have talked about that, and that's a little bit tougher, just because we don't know how an area is ultimately going to build out. We could speculate on what could happen there, but really, even when we annex an area, we have in our comp plan land use for all of our urban growth areas sort of already designated. But that could change when we annex it. I mean, our code is pretty explicit about that once an area is annexed, that it can come, back to the it comes back to the planning commission and council, and those things can change at that point. So, it's not as cut and dry, I think, as that, unfortunately. And so predicting how an area is going to build out is a little bit tougher. So we can speculate. Like I said, we have some areas that are clearly commercial uses now. The likelihood of them being residential in the future is, maybe a very small percent of a chance. And other areas are clearly residential. But you might have large swaths, if we have some larger parcels within the urban growth area, that could be turned into, an industrial development. And maybe within our city boundary, we have also an area that's already industrial or commercial. Somebody might look at that and speculate and say, well, I'm going to apply for a comp plan amendment and make a change there. And the city might look at it and say, yep, that absolutely makes sense. We're going to go ahead with that. And then that throws that whole thing kind of out of whack. So I think it's a little bit harder. And in answer to your question, I'm honestly really anxious. Excuse me, I'm really anxious to see what this fiscal analysis looks like and what the fiscal model looks like myself, and kind of see what Burke is coming up with. I haven't seen anything yet because the data has been kind of dragging, and it's been tough to get all the data that they need. And there's a lot of it. So for them to crunch it all together, it's been taking some additional time as well. So, but I am kind of interested to see in it and what their predictions look like within that data. What they are looking at for predictive indicators as well.
Thank you.
But I will take note of your question, Commissioner Brown, and I will ask that of Burke for sure.
So, Carl, one of the hurdles that, let's say the city wanted to proceed with an annexation. One of the hurdles is, as I understand it from your presentation, there has to be a survey and there has to be a 60% affirmative vote from the residents, right?
Under that particular annexation type, yes. Annexation by petition, yes.
Okay. Does that seem like a high hurdle to you, or? I mean, it seems like a high hurdle to me.
Yeah, I think it necessarily is because, if you're allowing 10% of the folks within that area to come to the city and say, yeah, we want to annex it, we want this whole area annexed, and the city says, okay, and then you're just bringing all those folks in. I think the idea behind it is that you want a majority of the people who are living in that area to be supportive of coming into the city, because a lot of people aren't. A lot of people would rather stay in the county. They feel like the city is more restrictive. Zoning code is more restrictive. There's more ability for the city to have a watchful eye over zoning violations, nuisances, things like that. It's a little looser in the county for things like that. They don't have the person power to be able to enforce their zoning codes the same way that the city can.
I was hoping that the new public participation plan might include a recommendation about communicating the city's position and recommendations to the residents of the annex of the area to be annexed. And I would think that Burke, with their experience in this area, would know a good communication plan from a not so good communication plan, or would see what things succeed and what things don't succeed, which would be a useful thing for the the council members to understand, I would think.
Oh, I think I see where you're going with that. I'm sorry, I misunderstood your question earlier then. But when you're thinking about the public participation plan, you're thinking about that in terms of when the city maybe potentially wants to annex an area, how
Right.
they reach out to that area to get consensus.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, so when I was talking about public participation, I was thinking about this process that we're doing right now for this analysis. So that's a different angle, and that maybe that is a factor in.
It would be it'd be interesting to get Burke's opinion about how high that hurdle happens to be,
Mhm.
based on experience, based on their experience.
Okay, that's a good one. Any other thoughts from the commissioners? I know that there's a lot here, and I know that we don't have all of the information yet. So I know it's kind of a big ask to have you all just throw ideas out there, but and maybe like I said earlier on in the presentation, I think it's a win if we just if the commission walks away from this meeting with a better understanding of the process and what we're trying to achieve here, and maybe that starts the wheels turning on pulling out some of these ideas around criteria. And then I think when we bring that fiscal analysis forward at the next meeting, maybe it will start to all kind of maybe start to make more sense, and we can start to really put some teeth on this. But maybe how about I ask this question: what would be more helpful for the Planning Commission? I mean, I've got a couple of things jotted down here that I can go back and ask Burke, but what would be useful for staff and the consultant to bring back at the next meeting to help inform or to help formulate some of these criteria, and maybe some examples of how to quantify the criteria in some manner.
I would love to see some examples from other cities that have gone through this to see how they struggled with the pros and cons. I'm sure that we're not the first to try this, and somebody's probably cracked the code, or there's some good ideas out there to look at.
Okay, we will get those for you.
Yeah, I had the same thought, Bob, and because we're really I feel like we're trying to move towards almost having a decision-making template on an issue that doesn't necessarily fit that kind of model, because each of those UGAs is going to have a very complex set of issues around it that, as Commissioner Soltis referred to earlier, both pros and cons, and all the things that everyone else has discussed this evening. But maybe there are templates out there. Maybe there are best practices that Burke could bring to us, and all of a sudden this thing that still I have a much better understanding. Thank you, Carl, because of what I read before the meeting and what you presented and the discussion here tonight. But it's a nebulous beast, and it's a big foggy woods right now still, as far as
Yeah.
thinking about trying to get to a finish line of having a tool or a product to recommend to the council.
Okay, that's fantastic feedback. I appreciate that feedback, Chair and
Yeah.
Commissioner Solis.
With what's been said, Carl, the numbers on both sides, whether it be the residents or the city, tend not to work out very well. So I don't believe this can be a purely numbers-based decision. There's a lot of these uncertain criteria that both sides will have in mind and consider when they're making petitions and decisions like this. So I will look forward to those kinds of criteria that might come from examples of other cities that have gone through the same kind of thing based on Burke's expertise.
I also think it could be a beneficial, because this is more of a draft review that we're going to see at the next meeting, if they could have, and I don't know how they're going about their process of doing their analysis, if they're doing it section by section, or if they're doing it more on the types of data and then creating a spreadsheet of sorts or something. But if they could have one particular area more complete than the rest of them, perhaps, so we could kind of see, even if it's the smallest of the areas or something, just to have kind of one area that we can look at and see all of the data that they were anticipating giving us for the rest of it, to see if that's something that is starting to make sense even for that particular smaller area or something, or if we feel like there's other things that aren't being considered or something like that.
Okay, that's great feedback. Thank you. We'll relay that. So just one area where this is kind of, this is what the finished product is probably going to look like. You know, it may not be completely finished, but we have a pretty good idea that this is what the rest of it will look like, but we really know the data here for sure.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of thing. Okay.
Yeah, that's a fabulous idea. And maybe even if I don't know if they could target or if we even know what the most likely of all those UGAs, which would be the one most likely that would go first, and have them home in on that and provide the data that Amanda just suggested, so that and then we could compare that to, you know, some epic successes from other towns that have done this and some epic failures, you know, in other areas where sounded like a good idea, didn't work out so well. But too late to boil the egg.
I would add too that I commend you and staff for your efforts in working with the county. That's a much more immediate response than annexation, because those kinds of development activities in UGA boundary areas are going on as we speak. And if we wait too long and bring those in through annexation, then there's a lot of redevelopment work that has to be done to bring them into a city standard. So if you're working with the county to encourage development along those standards now, we are way ahead of the game. And so I commend you for doing that.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yeah, that would be the goal of having something like an UGAMA in place. And every day that we don't have one, we're falling kind of further behind. And to your point, when those areas then are annexed, then we're bringing in a lot of non-conforming development, you know, that gets to remain non-conforming, but it isn't necessarily up to the standard that the city might have required at the time that it was developed. So yeah, I appreciate that. All right, well, this if there's nothing, this was some really good feedback. I think this was a very good meeting. I feel like this is how this project might go. It's a little at the end of discussions and just at the end of the process, even it might be a little anticlimactic, you know, I don't know. But I feel like I got a lot of really good information here. And we have a recording of this, so Burke can come back and listen to this as well. And I think that we can certainly bring you all back. I really like the idea of getting some examples. I should have considered that. I kind of feel like a bonehead for not have considered that previously. But I will go and we will go and get that for you, kind of a survey of some examples and best practices that we can find out there and bring that back to you for the next meeting as well as hopefully a start or maybe a complete, I don't know yet, fiscal analysis, fiscal model. And certainly we will focus in on one area in particular and see if we can have kind of a, this is what it should look like for each of the areas in the end. So
Carl, you may already be aware, and probably the chair, but I will kind of make this announcement for fellow commissioners that might not be aware. I have been appointed by the council as a member of the Design Review Board as well.
Oh, excellent.
congratulations, Commissioner Bradbury. And
Thank you.
thank you very much for doing that. Really do appreciate that. That's an exciting appointment. You get to see a lot of development come across your desk. So,
I'm looking forward to that part of it.
yeah, that's good. Definitely appreciate that.
Will be represented well.
No, thank you.
Active briefing every meeting, Larry.
I'll be ready.
Is that something that you do because I remember seeing the email come out as a member of the Planning Commission that they were requesting that? And is that something then that you would come and give us some kind of an update every so often?
It is, I think, part of the process and what the Planning Commission itself as a body benefits from. It was suggested that it would in fact be beneficial to have one of our members be part of the Design Review Board. And so I put my name in for that position and was approved for it. And so I will be more than happy to provide any kind of feedback I can from those board meetings.
That's great.
Yeah, I think that's great too, to have some of that cross-pollination between boards and commissions is always a good thing, especially with the work that we're doing here and how it fits together. And there's going to be some opportunity likely if and when we get into updating the design manual, that would be something that would involve both the Design Review Board and the Planning Commission. So that would be it's a great bridge as well.
Yeah, I hope it works out well. I think it will. I have a strong construction background, including in large scale development activities. So I'm looking forward to applying that skill set.
Great. Thank you again.
Okay, so other business? Carl, next meeting?
Yes, so next meeting is
September 2nd,
September 2nd. Thank you, Michelle.
comp plan update.
Yeah, so we're going to be bringing the arts and culture element draft to the Planning Commission. So we've worked that through with the Arts Commission. This was an application that came in back in 2018, something that the Arts Commission had been wanting to do, which was to create their own have their own element within the comprehensive plan. And it had been kind of kicked down the road for a while. And finally, council said, let's go ahead and get this done. And so we brought a consultant in to help us out because we just didn't have enough staff time to really pull all of these things off. And so they looked at what was originally proposed. And then we went to the Arts Commission. There was a series of interviews that were done by the consultant with the Arts Commission and others who were originally working on that element. And we've kind of honed it into something that everybody feels good about at this point. And so that we'll be bringing that to Planning Commission for your consideration. And as part of that, we also looked at our land use element and our housing element to try and identify any areas that would have been impacted or affected by the changes to our land or to our zoning regulations relative to the moratorium that took place a few years back that some of you will remember. And so there were a lot of changes made to our zoning code. When we made changes, of course, we were considering our comp plan and trying to make sure that there was, that we weren't making any inconsistencies or that the comp plan was supporting those zoning changes, those code changes, but we wanted to have somebody put their eye on it and make sure that we weren't too completely out of consistency. And I think that what we've found is that we really aren't. The consultant has looked at it and is making some recommendations. And I think a lot of those recommendations that we're receiving through this process, in not relative to the arts and culture element, but relative to land use and housing, are going to help inform our comprehensive plan update for 2024. So I think it's going to be some valuable information that we're going to get from that, but I don't know that it's going to be real substantive changes necessarily at this point. So anyway, I ramble on and on, or we could just wait until September 2nd and talk about it. And so I'm at this point, I am keeping your schedule full. I'm really hoping to not miss a planning commission or cancel a planning commission meeting for the rest of the year. I've got it out on our whiteboard. I think I've got something penciled in on every planning commission date. At this point, Michelle's nodding her head. So yeah, I think I got that right. And so I'm hoping, really hoping, that we can get all of these projects done by the end of the year is my goal. That's, again, very ambitious, but shoot for the moon, and then back off if I have to.
Yeah, sounds good. Okay. Any other business from any of the commissioners? All right. Well then, I almost forgot. Carl wanted me to ask y'all, with his rather generous salary increase, what would be a good day for him to get together and buy us all beer and pizza?
Oh, I had forgotten that I'd asked about that. That's right. Yeah.
Anyway, and for the record, that's not a serious request. So I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
Second.
I'll second that.
Okay. And so all those in favor of adjourning, say aye.
All right.
Aye.
Excellent. Good to have your vote this week, Tom. And with that, we will close the meeting at 6:33. The meeting's adjourned.